are people booing the person, or are they booing the uniform, or are they booing the organization? Because, like I said, most of the guys weren't even here, including myself. So it's like, what you don't do, you can't control what people do.
That was Dusty Baker, as his team is in the Bronx and received what you would anticipate from Bronx fan base that is a little bit agitated with the Houston Astros. We'll get into all that here on the Fox 26 Sports Stream. Welcome as always. May the 4th be with you. All right, well, that's become cliched now, so we'll eschew all the Star Wars references for this show. I'm Sal Manine, sports producer here at Fox 26. We'll get into Astros Yanks. Right now, the Yankees with a 3-1 lead as they head to the bottom of the 3rd inning in the Bronx. We'll speak with Ty Butler from ESPN New York, who covers the Yankees on a regular basis, get the Yankees' perspective on what's really become their biggest rival in the Houston Astros, especially because the Stros have met the Pinstripes twice in the last 4 years, winning both, of course. And Ty's a big part of ESPN's NBA coverage, specifically the Nets and the Knicks. So we'll talk a little NBA with him, but we're going to have to start with the NFL draft, where the Texans had to wait until round 3, day 2, to make their first selection. But when they did, they definitely made some waves. We know that this was a team that had all kinds of needs. Quarterback is probably a need because nobody knows what exactly the future holds for Deshaun Watson, but that's still a position that's in such limbo. You thought maybe they don't address it right away, or maybe they take a flyer on a guy in the late rounds, but didn't really jump to the top of their needs. But that's where they went with their first pick, going after Davis Mills out of Stanford. So we'll hear from him, and we'll hear from his college head coach, David Shaw, who Mark Berman spoke with earlier today on just what the Texans are getting from their quarterback, who they took with their first pick coming in the 3rd round. Now, obviously, there's many different ways to look at this draft if you're a Texans fan, especially when they had such limited opportunities. This roster needs a complete overhaul because of whether it's aging veterans, they need an injection of youth, they need to find more talent, and they need to find consistency. You weren't going to fix all of that in one draft, and certainly not when you were not picking in rounds 1 or 2. So I understand why a lot of fans would look and go, why did they draft a quarterback? You don't even know what the future holds for Deshaun Watson. You already have established vets in Tyrod Taylor and Ryan Finley. Why do you need to add depth there? So let's try to take a look at both sides of this. First, there's what we just mentioned. You needed help basically everywhere outside of Deshaun Watson. And if we're just talking play on the field in 2020, outside of Deshaun Watson, every other unit for the Texans had issues or had room for improvement. So why not go after depth on the offensive line? Find some help in the secondary. There was still a lot of value that you could find in round 3. The Texans did address one of their needs, getting Nico Collins, wide receiver out of Michigan, in round 3. But then after that, are you really going to fix the myriad of issues you have in rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7, especially those late rounds where it's kind of 50-50 if guys even make the roster, let alone how quickly they can become impact players. So there is the argument that you need so much help. Why waste your first draft pick on a quarterback, let alone the 8th quarterback taken in this draft? And again, if you just look to last year, Deshaun Watson, if you're talking just about play on the field, he played quarterback about as well as you could, despite issues with his offensive line, despite an inconsistent run game, despite a wide receiving core that had all kinds of questions, losing DeAndre Hopkins, of course, to the trade to the Cardinals. Will Fuller was suspended. You had guys in and out of the lineups because of injuries and various other reasons. Deshaun Watson still put up historic numbers for an NFL quarterback, yet the Texans still finished with only 4 wins. So that's why you could say, even if you found a QB who you think is going to answer questions for you at the most important position going forward, it doesn't matter because the rest of your roster still needs to be repaired. So I understand that logic. Let's try to take a look at it from the other side and say quarterback is the most important position in the draft. You know that we talked about last week, even if you have a first round pick, even if you take a QB in round 2, it does not guarantee that that quarterback is going to take you to the Super Bowl. Since Peyton Manning went number 1 overall in 1998, only twice since then have a quarterback that's been drafted in the top 10 led their franchise to a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes just a few years ago, and Peyton's brother Eli, who was taken with the number 1 overall pick. So even if you want to say wait until next year, Texans, when you can draft a quarterback, since everybody, and especially didn't matter which broadcast you watched the draft on this past weekend, basically every reporter and insider and exec scout, whoever they brought out, all said it's not a matter of if, but when Deshaun Watson will no longer be a member of the Houston Texans. And they still don't even know if or when he could play in 2021. And if he can play, will it be in a Houston uniform? So wait until next year to draft a quarterback. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that you are getting your franchise cornerstone, especially since what we know right now of the QBs who are going to be in the 2021 mix or 2022 mix for the NFL draft, there's not a Trevor Lawrence or an Andrew Luck or even Tua before he got hurt. Remember, tank for Tua was such a big deal before he went down with that hip injury that has slowed his return, and at least the Dolphins are hoping is part of the reason he struggled as a rookie. Even before that happened, though, tank for Tua was what everybody was saying and what the Dolphins had to try to do in order to secure the number 1 pick and try to get Tua Tagovailoa. So there's not a quarterback of that caliber right now when you look at the crop of 2022 quarterback prospects. Now, Davis Mills is a guy who, had he gone back to Stanford, because even though he was a 4-year player, he still had another year of eligibility because injuries slowed the start of his Cardinal career. He's a guy who a lot of scouts and experts, and take it for what you will, believe could possibly rise up the ranks with a strong season. Remember, he was limited to only half a season last year because the Pac-12 was one of the last conferences to give the green light to go ahead and play football. So he didn't play 12, 13 games like a lot of other college QBs did. So maybe he comes back and he has a good year, and a lot of people think he could be a first-round quarterback and go in the first half of round number 1. That all plays into the logic, perhaps, of the Houston Texans saying, if we think this guy is just as good or perhaps has an even better skill set, he's just very raw, and he needs time to develop, as the guys who are coming up behind him, whether it's Sam Howell at North Carolina, Spencer Rattler at OU, just a couple of the guys who could vie for the first quarterback off the board in next year's draft. Maybe that's why the Texans say, we don't have much. This is a lost year anyways in terms of draft capital. We don't have much this year to do in this NFL draft. So here's a guy who's available. Here's a guy who we like. And if it doesn't work out, then you're back to square one in 2022. Let's hear, though, from Davis Mills and what he had to say about being selected by the Houston Texans and his opportunities now to try to make some way in that quarterback room.
Surprised by the call. Obviously very humbled to take on this new challenge in the NFL. Just can't wait to get out to Houston and meet the staff, meet the coaches, meet the players, and start putting my head down and get to work and start earning my teammates' trust.
Davis, what do you feel like you bring the Texans?
I think first thing, obviously I can't do it from the start, but I think my leadership ability is up there. Obviously you got to get in front of some of my teammates and start building their respect by putting in hard work. And then the next thing, just that winning mentality and that ability on the field.
Again, that was Davis Mills shortly after being drafted by the Texans. Update, Michael Brantley just went yard for the Astros. So 3-2 now, New York in the top of the 4th inning. But Davis Mills has the pedigree. He was the number 1 quarterback prospect in the class of 2017. He was ranked ahead of Tua, ahead of Jake Fromm, well ahead of Mac Jones, he was the guy that everybody in the country wanted in 2017, went to Stanford, had to deal with some injuries early on, but in his last, again, small sample size, but in the last few games he played for the Cardinal, showed flashes of why a lot of people think he has first-round talent. It's just a matter of experience and getting acclimated to the NFL. Let's get one more in from Davis Mills on making the transition to the next level and why he decided to come out this year and not perhaps go back to school, see if he could raise his stock and guarantee himself a first-round selection next year as opposed to coming out a year early.
I mean, I feel like I have a ton of ability to come in and compete at the next level. I'm fully ready in that manner, and then I'm also trained really well at Stanford on the mental side of the game as well. So I feel fully prepared to come in and compete and take my shot at the next level.
And again, we talked to David Shaw earlier today, who had nothing but great things to say about Davis Mills. Now, obviously, that's his guy, played for him for 4 years, was obviously a highly touted recruit, but David Shaw does have a proven track record, not just in the college game, but he was an NFL assistant before returning to his alma mater to coach at Stanford. Of course, everybody in Houston knows what he did with one of the more famous Stanford quarterbacks after John Elway and Stratford's own Andrew Luck. But David Shaw has seen talent. He's seen the best of the best, and he had nothing but good things to say about Davis Mills. Here's a small portion of what Coach Shaw had to say to our own sports director, Mark Berman, earlier today.
The ability, I think, is obvious when you watch the film. Arm strength, accuracy, athleticism, great at escaping, getting out of danger. You wouldn't necessarily call him fast, but you watch him. He's an athlete. He's made moves in the backfield to get away from rushers, pushing up in the pocket, scrambling for first downs. Guy's got all the intangibles: character, leadership, toughness. Much has been said too that if he did come back, he probably would be one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in America and potentially a top 15 pick. So that's why, to me, he's such a steal in the 3rd round to get a guy that, if he came back to college, was probably going to be a first 15 pick with another year of college. So the ability is there, the intangibles are there, and I'm looking forward to seeing him to depending on the situation there, have a chance to come in and compete. We've never tried to throw the ball, see how far he can throw it, but as a junior in high school, I saw him throw the ball 74 yards. It was just a flick of the wrist. So the arm strength is up there with some of the better guys in the NFL starting day one. You don't necessarily see it in our offense because he's not a showy guy. He'd rather, throw the ball and make it complete than have to throw the ball a mile down the field, but he can. His escapability, his athleticism, he's not Kyler Murray athleticism-wise. He's not Deshaun Watson athleticism-wise, but he's also not a drop-back pocket quarterback. This guy can escape. This guy can run. This guy can move.
Now, since he's already on the roster and you can't go back and say, oh, well, they should have gone after a different position there. If the Texans play this right, they've taken a lottery ticket that could perhaps pay off with a jackpot. But playing it right is the big question going forward. If they bring Davis Mills along slowly, don't thrust him into the fire right away, because even though he has a proven track record at Stanford and he has familiarity with Pep Hamilton, or at least Pep Hamilton, the Texans' new quarterbacks coach, has familiarity with the Stanford offense because that's where he was before coming to the NFL. Even though all that's there, this is still likely to be an offense that's going to have questions and inconsistency along the offensive line. We saw over the last few years how much Deshaun Watson was constantly running for his life. So do you really want to stick a rookie who has not had a lot of playing experience as a starting quarterback in college, and who we know by his own coach's admission does not have the kind of athletic dynamism that a Deshaun Watson has? Do you want to stick him behind a suspect offensive line, throwing to a bunch of new wide receivers, and that's a group that is still finding its way as a complete unit for the Houston Texans? or if they bring Davis Mills along slowly, basically use this as almost a redshirt type year, let him develop, let him learn under a veteran like Tyrod Taylor, and then maybe you do start to see in year 2, or maybe it takes 2 years of sitting. In year 3, maybe he does put it all together, and you see the guy that everybody was raving about as a high school senior in Georgia, and then obviously why he was ranked above guys like Tua and Mac Jones and Kellen Mond coming out of high school. So yes, I understand the frustration with Texans fans. And of course, everybody is going to want to spin it in hindsight and say, no, this is a good deal. And David Shaw, his coach, is going to stick up for his guy. But there's at least some things there that you can like and that you can build on if you are going to go the route of taking a flyer on a guy in the middle rounds. Because again, the Texans still have a lot more work to do, and perhaps that's why you saw them sign so many free agents, and they didn't lock up so many of these guys who new GM Nick Caserio brought in. It's not like he signed them all to these monster long-term deals. That if this is what they have to do for the 2021 season, understanding that, yes, it's probably going to be a struggle, but in the end, if you end up with a high draft pick and you keep all your picks going forward, then you can rebuild this roster. It's going to be painful in the short term, but you just take a look around. I mean, look within the own division with the Indianapolis Colts just a few years ago. Everybody thought they were the joke of the league, especially when Andrew Luck abruptly retired on the eve of the regular season. You're kind of looking around and going, where does this franchise go? And now they've proven they're a consistent playoff contender and are hoping now with their trade of Carson Wentz that they can take a step further. So if you play it right, you draft smartly, you hang on to your draft picks, you can rebuild your franchise within a couple years. So certainly remains to be seen for the Texans. We'll get one more in from David Shaw before we bring in Ty Butler. We do want to update, though, the Astros just tied it up. Looks like Yuli Gurriel went yard. So the home run ball is flying in the Bronx, as it is now 3-3, or excuse me, Yuli didn't go yard. It was an RBI double. So 3-3, only one out. Yuli's on second as the Astros really making Domingo Germán, the Yankee starter, work here in the top of the fourth. Let's get one more from David Shaw, though, on the transition that his quarterback, Davis Mills, will be making from college to the NFL.
I'm excited. Obviously, I have an NFL background. We run an NFL style of offense. It's not, no offense to anybody, it's not a spread offense. It's the same offense that, the Saints run, the Raiders run, different teams around the league. And so he's going to be able to come in and have the command. Right. He's not getting the play from the sidelines, from signs like some of these college guys are getting. He's making audibles. He's checking plays. He's changing protections. He's handling the running game, going from side to side or completely changing the run based on the look. So this guy knows football. He knows defenses as well as offenses. My first offensive coordinator when I took over as a head coach was Pep Hamilton. Pep Hamilton's the quarterback coach there. He knows our offense, knows what we do. So he'll do a great job of helping translate the terminology from what we did to what the Texans do. So I think that'll make it smooth. And if Deshaun's not there, I think it's even money in competition to see who the starting quarterback is.
We're on Astros Yankees. It's my pleasure to welcome in from ESPN New York, my man Ty Butler. How you doing, bro? Welcome to the show.
Yo, so when you left Syracuse and you said you were upgrading, I didn't know that you also meant like physically. You got the beard going, nice little suit. You're not the Salmonine I know from Q's. What's going on, brother?
Yeah, I always heard people talk about the glow up. I don't know if this is quite it, but hey, I'll take it.
You're a late bloomer. You're a late bloomer.
Yes, there we go. And speaking of late blooming, that's what both the Astros and Yankees are hoping for after the month of April did not go how they started. Take me into what it was like in New York after the Yankees get off to that dreadful start. Obviously, they come into this series having won 8 of 11, but I remember just a few weeks ago, it seems like you couldn't click on any publication involving the Yankees that wasn't calling for the head of somebody either on the team or on the bench.
Stop me if you've heard this before. The Yankees are struggling, so X should be fired, whether it's a manager, it's the GM, because people were calling for Cashman and Boone. And what I didn't understand was, so the Yankees, obviously they struggling. What was more concerning to me was how they were losing and not that they were losing. It's early in the season. How do you want a manager fired, 25 games in? But for me, the concern was they can't hit with runners in scoring position. They don't pitch well outside of Cole. The bullpen has been fantastic, but any starter not named Garrett Cole was just an experience in itself. Sloppy on defense, and just all around a team that you couldn't look at and say, yeah, they have a chance of winning the World Series. They righted the ship, but you beat the Tigers, you beat the Orioles. Now this is a big series for the Yankees, big in quotation marks, because again, it's still early, but you look forward to playing against one of the teams you look to compete against when it comes to winning a championship as you go through this American League in the playoffs.
What's the buzz been like for this series specifically? I mean, everybody knows Yankees Red Sox is kind of the gold standard when it comes to rivalries, but that hasn't been the same as it was 10, 15 years ago. But Astros Yankees, especially because of meeting in the ALCS twice in the last 4 years, what's it been like up there from the Yankees perspective facing the Astros? And of course, this is the first time they'll see them since the scandal came to light and MLB handed down its suspensions.
Well, it's lost a little bit of its luster because of what you just mentioned. Last year we go through the pandemic, so you don't have fans in the stands. This year, the team hasn't gotten off to a great start. And, it's early in the season, so it's Yankees, Astros, but it doesn't feel like if we had gotten this series last year, it would be completely different. It feels like the Astros, they got lucky that, if in any way you can get lucky during the pandemic, just from the standpoint of you don't have all the fans screaming at them and just, not assaulting them, but verbally assaulting them in any way that they can. So it's not as big as it would have been last year, but it's still huge. Like, this isn't a series that the Yankees get swept. You're going to feel like, the sun is going to shine tomorrow. It's a big series. It's a huge series from a fan standpoint. I don't know how the Yankees, the players actually feel about it but from a fan base standpoint, it's huge.
Now, try to explain this to me from a Yankees standpoint as best you can. I realize you need a certain type of confidence and swagger if you're going to play in the big leagues every day. But I just get the feeling, listening to some of the comments, especially during the offseason from the Yankees, or I think back to 2018, they win one game in Fenway Park, and Aaron Judge is blasting New York, New York, outside the clubhouse, the Red Sox clubhouse. The Yankees carry themselves like they're the Jeter, Posada, Pettit Yankees, whereas, yeah, maybe 4 years ago when the Yanks lost that 7-game series to the Astros, you thought, oh, sign it up for this is going to be the matchup you're going to see years going forward. But you look at this roster for the Yanks, they haven't won anything outside of Brett Gardner.
Yeah, they haven't. And the big problem to me is philosophy. And I know everyone's doing the whole analytics thing, but for the Yankees, look, it's just not working. Like, you fired Joe Girardi because you felt like bringing in a new guy in Aaron Boone was going to help you get to whatever that next level was. Since Girardi went to Game 7 of the ALCS against the Astros, they haven't been to that point or even further. So they like you said, they walk around with this swag like they're the team that's, to beat. They're not the team to beat. And I do wonder, I thought about this the other day. Like, we've all just universally accepted that a 31-year-old superstar in his prime, who's the highest paid offensive player on the team in Giancarlo Stanton, his clock in is just 3 to 4 at-bats a night. He's a full-time DH. You don't have to play the field. You don't have to bust it out the box. All you have to do every night is show up for 3 or 4 at-bats, best case scenario, 5 at-bats. How have we just accepted? This is a 31-year-old in the prime of his career. Aaron Judge, 3 games into the season, is sore, getting rest days. Clint Frazier can't catch the ball. So there are a bevy of issues with this team, but it's just like certain things we have just universally accept that if you go back to the Posada, Jeter, Bernie Williams days, you'd be looking at this and like, what the heck is going on? So that's, to me, what I find to be one of the most fascinating aspects to this baseball team.
You mentioned it a short time ago. It's still early, so kind of regardless of what happens these 3 games in the Bronx, you can't definitively say, oh, well, that's going to be the team that's going to the or going to win the pennant in the AL. But when I look at the entire American League, whether it's the Yankees or the Astros getting off to slow starts, the Red Sox or the Royals getting off to these red hot starts, none of them, though, I can right now, the first week of May, say, yup, that's the team you're going to have to go through. That's the team you're going to have to beat. Is there anybody in the American League that folks in New York are looking at and going, yeah, it's going to be a tall task trying to take them down in pinstripes?
No, and the Yankees, I would say, even though right now they are 2.5 games back in the American League East, they are still the prohibitive favorites to win this division. Like the Rays, for some reason, just give them trouble. The Rays haven't been good against anyone else this year outside of the Yankees. They just, for some reason or whatever, have the Yankees number. But I would still say they're the favorites to win that division. And the Astros, just because of the pedigree, I know they've lost, a lot of their players from that World Series team, but because of the pedigree, Springer's now in Toronto. Because of that pedigree and the rivalry, I would say the Astros would be the team that I fear the most. But coming into the season, no one had better odds to make it to the World Series in the American League outside of the Yankees. I would say now, today, I feel the same way. But it's the Padres, it's the Dodgers. I'm already looking at the National League, and you can say that's a flaw in my perspective as a fan. I'm already looking at the National League. The Yankees, as presently constructed from a talent standpoint, the best in the American League. Pitching outside of Cole, yes, you have question marks, but they should be able to score enough runs. Their bullpen is outstanding. You should be able to, with Herman, Montgomery, Severino is going to be back at some point. And yes, those are a bunch of question marks, but they should be good enough to get to the World Series. And if not, we're going to have to talk about Aaron Boone next year. We're going to have to talk about if this is the right guy, which I don't know how you feel about this. It's so tough for me to analyze like whether a manager should be fired or not. Like we're experiencing that here in New York with the Mets. They're 1 game under 500.
They just cleaned house with the assistants last night.
Yeah, they fired their bench coach. It is like, how do we analyze managers? Because I look at Aaron Boone, he's not as valuable as people think he is. He is there to submit the lineups. He's not really putting the lineups together. He's going to make some decisions in the bullpen, but for the most part, all of these decisions are made before the game. So I do wonder, like, can we blame Aaron Boone really? Is he the guy that is going to take the brunt of the criticism where he's not really doing much? So I think in this day of baseball, it's so hard to be critical of a manager, knowing that, the responsibilities aren't what Joe Torre had or Joe Girardi.
There's certainly questions about the roster construction, which, to your point, you can say how much does Aaron Boone have a role to play in that. Exactly. One more baseball one before we have to talk a little bit about your Jets and what they did at number 2. But I'm going to stir the pot a little. The Astros were unable in spring training to come to a long-term deal with Carlos Correa, who at least right now says he's ready to be a free agent. We know he wants something in the realm of Francisco Lindor money. Probably not going to get that big of a deal, but he's probably going to be the best shortstop on the market. The Gleyber Torres shortstop experiment is not working. Do you think if we still see Gleyber struggling to field his position, that the Yanks make a run at Correa in the offseason?
I don't know if they're going to throw a boatload of money at any free agent. You've already got Cole and then Stanton. That's a lot of money. And you have some decisions to make about the players on your team with Gary Sanchez. Judge is going to want a huge contract. I don't know if it's going to warrant that, but the feeling is that Judge is going to want some big time money. There were reports last week that he's talking to the Angels or whatever, but I don't know that you make a run at Carlos Correa. He is definitely one of the best shortstops in baseball. He had some injuries a couple of seasons ago, but I don't think the Yankees make a run at him. I will tell you this, by the way, one of the biggest mistakes they made of the past was letting go Didi Gregorius. And I get he was coming off of the elbow injury, so you worried about the diminished, physical abilities, but he definitely held down that fort as good as you can, taking over for a guy like Derek Jeter. He was a lefty in the lineup with some pop, played excellent defense. He had a little bit of a clutch gene in him. So no on Carlos Correa, but Didi is the guy to me that really got away. But you got to hang with Glaber. You got to hang with Glaber. You're all in on this guy. He's still, from a talent standpoint, A-list. It's just he hasn't been able to put it together on defense. And then at the plate, he just looks lost. But I think you still got to ride with Glaber.
And Astros fans certainly remember him from that 2019 ALCS. He looked great in that series. All right, before I get you out of here, we got to talk NBA because there's really no reason to talk about it here in Houston. I think a lot of Houston fans, though, are paying much closer attention to the Brooklyn Nets, obviously, because of James Harden. We haven't seen a ton of Harden, Kyrie, KD together, yet the Nets are still getting it done. And I just have a hard time believing that if the big three are healthy, that they are not going to run through the Eastern Conference. What's it been like up there in New York now that Brooklyn, who has been and probably will always be an afterthought to the New York Knicks, but now they've ascended to arguably the best team in the NBA?
And you just made the point there right in your question. I am someone who I love Kevin Durant. You know that. So I have a rooting interest in the Nets. I don't care about the Nets. I just want to see Durant win titles. But it's amazing that a Knicks team 9 games over 500 somehow still dominates the headlines. Like, the fan base is so invigorated. I saw someone on Twitter today saying, you know, the Knicks had the coach of the year, the MVP, the 6th man of the year, the most improved. They're just going to sweep the award. Like, that is the feeling here in New York City. But to your point about the Nets, I think that there are only 2 things that can stop them. Health, because each one of their superstars has, you know, spent some time injured this year, Durant and Harden more significantly than Irving, and defense. If you allow Joe Embiid to give you 40 a night in a series, or Giannis, he went off for 49 points the other night. If those things happen, it's going to be hard to advance. But to your other point that you made, it's hard to see like anyone beating this team 4 times in 2 weeks. Like, it's like you're talking about Durant, Harden, and Irving. If 2 of those guys are off, the other guy can easily give you 40 plus on that given night. So I don't know that they'll run through the East, because you'll have whatever their first round matchup is, but then you've got to go through Milwaukee and Philly to get to whoever you're playing the NBA Finals. So I don't know that they'll waltz through the Eastern Conference, but to me, it's simple math. I've got Durant, Irving, and Harden, and you don't. So I think that is more than enough reason and confidence for me to have in this team getting to the NBA Finals.
No, I agree. I think sometimes we overthink these things, and yeah, maybe run through the East is the wrong phrase to use. But if those 3 guys are healthy, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they scored 160 points in a playoff game. I mean, that's the type of firepower that they have to just go off for $150 or something like that. By the way,
guess who's one of my favorite players in the league now?
James Harden?
James Harden, baby. There we go.
There you go. Another member of the New York media who for years, all the national media, everybody outside of Houston, James Harden's killing basketball. The ball stops with him. One-dimensional player. Now he plays on the big stage and people are like, hey, did you know James Harden could pass? Did you know he's a playmaker? Acted like people in Houston didn't know this for close to a decade.
And I would say this. I work with someone at ESPN New York who does TV for the Knicks. His name is Alan Hahn. And he tweeted out that like he was someone who just didn't like to watch James Harden. Like it was tough on the eyes to watch what he did in Houston. And it was mainly just the dribble for 23 seconds and hoist up a 3, you know, kick his legs out and get fouled. So he tweets out, wow, man, like I really enjoy watching this version of James Harden. Dude, the Houston Rockets fans and his mentions destroying him. I quote tweeted that tweet and supported it with numbers on how like his game has actually changed slightly. Like he's not holding the ball as much. You know, he's got a higher true shooting percent. Like I went through all of the analytics. Yo, them dudes attacking me. That them Houston Rockets fans are sensitive. That they are sensitive.
Red Nation, Clutch City, they got to defend their guy, especially because there's been little else to defend here in Houston from an NBA standpoint this season.
Dude, they act like there's some small markets. Like it reminds me of like UFC fans where it's a niche audience. People don't really pay attention to you. So when they do talk about you, you feel disrespected because you feel like they don't know what they're talking about. And that happens with smaller market teams. The Rockets, that's the number 3 market. What is that? The number 4 market here in the country. They act like
fourth
they're
biggest city. Yep.
Yeah.
I think we need here in Houston something to grab onto, because if the University of Houston didn't go to the Final Four, you're just talking about an abysmal pandemic year for the city of Houston with everything they've gone through over the past year from a sporting standpoint.
Texans, and we haven't even talked about Watson and the Texans.
Yeah, I mean, a guy who we still don't even know what his football future is, let alone if it is going to ever be in a Texans jersey yet again. I want to get to the Western Conference quickly before we get you out of here. The West, where the Rockets sit at dead last and are now just praying that the ping pong balls land in their favor for Cade Cunningham. But you look at the Jazz, you look at the Suns, and shout out to Chris Paul. I'm sure Daryl Morey, when he's old and gray, and when he writes his tell-all book one day, will say, I never wanted to get rid of CP3, especially if we knew he was going to go vegan and all of a sudden he never gets hurt again. But the Jazz, the Suns, even the Nuggets, who probably have the MVP, I still don't see any of these teams winning the Western Conference if the Clippers or the Lakers are at full strength. And we know that LeBron says he's not at 100%, and he's probably going to try his best to get himself there over these final couple weeks of the regular season. But I still have a hard time seeing anybody beating either of the 2 LA teams if they are healthy.
Now, if you're those teams you mentioned, Denver, Phoenix, and Utah, what you have to absolutely be rooting for is a scenario that's on the table, and that is the Lakers and the Clippers playing each other in the first round. Like that could be a 4-5 matchup. You're not getting through both of those teams. You're not getting through Kawhi, Paul George, and then LeBron and Anthony Davis. So if you can have one of those teams knock the other off, then that presents a much more favorable path. The Lakers, if they're healthy, I don't think they're losing in the Western Conference final, in the Western Conference. Anthony Davis last night looked great, but prior to that, he looked woeful. LeBron comes back for 2 games, and now he's out again. So I'm a little concerned from, like, LeBron has played 18 years. He's had 2 significant injuries. One was the groin injury a couple of years ago, and now this ankle injury. Both times he re-aggravated it. So I don't know to what degree, like the extent of this injury, especially in today's NBA. Like, how do we judge between, resting guys, because we do have the whole load management thing, versus we just want them to be fresh for the playoffs, versus the injury is actually significant. So here's what it is, Sal. If LeBron or Anthony Davis is compromised, the Lakers aren't winning the West. But if they're whatever, as close to 100% as possible, I think that your best money, your best shot is to bet on this team getting to the finals.
No, I certainly agree. And that's why you just have to wonder just how serious it is with LeBron. And if AD plays like he did last night, especially down the stretch of that game, then yeah, he can probably carry the Lakers if they don't have to face the Clips in round 1. And then maybe you can get LeBron closer to 100% by the time you get to round 2. Either way, it's something folks here in Houston are going to have a long time to sit and reminisce about. Oh, yeah, back when our team used to be in the NBA playoffs is, again, worst record in the league, and just hoping for
Back when we used to miss 27 straight 3-pointers.
A night that will forever live in infamy in Houston sports.
Back when we were a hamstring injury away from possibly not just getting to the NBA finals, but winning the whole damn thing.
Yep, that is going to be the big what if. I've tried to think about it, and it's probably the biggest what if in Houston sports over the last decade or so, because right at the beginning of the decade, you had some great Texans teams, but the quarterback kept getting hurt right before the playoffs. But really, if you go back to just after that, so at least until 2012, 2013, it's the biggest what if in Houston sports. What if they just make a couple 3-pointers, or what if CP3 doesn't get hurt? Because remember, even if CP is hurt, if they just hit a few of those threes and somehow take Game 7 at home, then maybe you get Chris Paul back in time for the finals, or at least by games 3, 4 or something. And yeah, the Western Conference was so much better in 2018 than the entirety of the East.
I don't know how it is out in Houston or down in Houston, I should say, but I feel like nationally, what doesn't get talked about enough is the great performance that was Trevor Ariza. Like, to throw up a donut in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals at home, I don't feel like he gets killed enough for that. And you say one of the biggest what ifs in Houston sports over the last decade. I think that's one of the biggest what ifs in NBA history. Like, think about how history has changed. If the Rockets win that title and all of a sudden the Warriors, they lose, do they break up? Like, that to me is one of the biggest what ifs in NBA history.
I actually would go back a year before that to 2017 or no, 2016, the Klay Thompson game in OKC. When Klay doesn't catch fire, now you're talking about the Thunder knock off the vaunted Warriors. KD probably doesn't leave because that Thunder team was probably winning the title that year. Again, whoever came out of the West, it seemed like is going to win the title. So perhaps Kevin Durant is still in Oklahoma City now, or maybe now he finally is in New York, but he never has that detour through Golden State. You don't have that dynasty. That one quarter from Klay Thompson definitively changed the entire outlook of the NBA. And don't forget, if the Warriors don't create that super team, maybe the Raptors don't go all in on Kawhi for a year.
LeBron could get another one. Maybe LeBron wins another one.
Maybe he doesn't even leave Cleveland then if he's got multiple rings with the Cavs. So all kinds of crazy
so many different layers to that 3-year period in NBA history that we're going to talk about forever. You're talking about some of the greatest players to ever live being affected by it. Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, James Harden, LeBron James, like that foursome right there, career-wise, legacy, because Harden, if he wins that title with Houston, I mean, the jump that he takes, we're now talking about James Harden maybe being what? One of the 15 greatest players ever, if he's able to get that done.
I think he's already in the list of, top 20,
of course,
25 players.
But they did crack 15.
Now, yes. Now the higher up you get on the ladder, the tougher it is to go from one rung to another. And that's the one big question mark, or the one big absence in his resume is a title. And he's got as good a chance as he did with any of the Houston teams now playing with the Nets. My thanks, Ty. It's been great catching up with you. Again, you can catch him on ESPN New York. Follow him on Twitter. Always great insights on all sports, especially the NBA. And I'm sure you'll have some choice things to point out for this Astros-Yankees series this week. I'm sure everybody is going to be dissecting it pitch by pitch, is what's become one of the better rivalries in baseball. Take it easy, my man.
I'm excited, man. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you bringing me on.
And here again is what the Rockets are hoping for, since they will not be a part of trying to take down KD or CP3 in the West or LeBron or any of that, hoping that it looks like they're going to be safe and finish with one of the 3 worst records in the league. So they'll be tied. Remember, the 3 bottom teams all have the same number of ping pong balls, as they will try to grab likely one of these guys if they retain a top 4 pick and they do not have to send it to Oklahoma City. So again, my thanks to Ty Butler, our thanks to Coach David Shaw from Stanford for joining us. An update: they are going to the bottom of the 5th right now in the Bronx, still knotted up at 3 apiece between the Yankees and the Astros. If you want to hear more from Coach Shaw, be sure to check out Fox 26 News tonight at 9 o'clock. Mark Berman will have much more on that. We'll also hear from Texans owner and chairman Cal McNair, who made a special appearance today. And, of course, we'll have everything you need from Yankee Stadium, as this game is only at about the midway point, is, again, knotted up at 3 apiece. That's do it for us here on the Fox 26 Sports Stream. I'm Sal Manine. We'll see you again next week. Peace.